50 years ago today, at 4 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, Israel was once again suddenly plunged into war. Simultaneously, the Egyptians from the south and the Syrians from the north unleashed a massive, unprecedented attack on the holiest day of the year. Soldiers were not prepared. The government ignored the warnings. The country was shut down because of the holiday. Citizens, if not in synagogue praying and fasting, were far from home in their phones, unable to respond and mobilize against this existential threat. As a result, and because of such poor planning and caught off guard, Israel lost close to 2,700 young men and women, almost 0.25% of the population. To put that into comparison, that would be like 170,000 American young men and women dying in a war. 170,000. Never up until then had the fragility of this young state been felt so substantially as in those first days of the war, when all seemed to be lost and the country might fall to her enemies. Literally, the words of the Machzor came to life: who shall live and who shall die, who by fire and who by thirst. Amongst the many, many accounts of those who were on the front lines of the war, I want to share this morning two with you, both as it happens about Americans who found themselves in Israel during the war. But I just want to take a moment and invite those who were in Israel during that time, who fought in the war at that time, to stand up for a minute. In Israel or fighting during the war. So the first story, Jonathan Davis, a native of California, who in 1969, as a student at Columbia, spent a year on the one-year program in Jerusalem. He fell in love with Israel and decided to stay after serving in the served in the IDF. Little did he know at the time that war would soon break out. He was a lone soldier, a term that didn't exist back then. The war started, he was immediately called up, and within no time was participating in a mission near the Syrian-Iraqi border under the command of Shaul Mofaz, later to become the IDF chief of staff. Disastrously, Davis and his group of soldiers found themselves trapped on a hilltop, surrounded by Syrian troops. Each man felt certain that they would die trying to fight their way to freedom. But by some miracle, and there were many miracles, and the remarkable fighting and courage of the 118 helicopter squadron of the Israeli Air Force, in what Davis says was one of the most courageous rescues ever done by that squadron, he and the others were snatched at the last minute from the clutches of death. Towards the end of the war, when Davis, greatly relieved and still in a highly emotional and stressed state, returned to the relative safety of his tiny apartment in Jerusalem, he was miffed to find that his mailbox had been painted bright red and that the paint had glued his letters together. I thought very highly of myself at the time, Davis Riley recalls. I was a lone soldier from California, and I thought I was so much better than these Georgian Jewish neighbors of mine who hadn't gone to the front line to battle the enemy. Angered at the apparent vandalization of his mailbox, he confronted his neighbors, complaining about their seeming disregard for him, given that he had just returned from battle. One of the neighbors looked at Davis and replied, "We knew that you were the only one in this building who went to war, and we painted your mailbox red so that the angel of death would skip over your threshold and spare you." Surprised, humbled, and most of all, touched by this response, Davis at that moment realized that the Jews in his building truly cared for them. As different as they were, as distant as they were together, and they shared a common destiny and bond. Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh Bazeh. All Jews are responsible for one another. With fighting fierce and little pre-warning, many Israelis were not in Israel at the time the war broke out and struggled to find their way back to help their comrades fight. One, Shlomi, it's an unusual Israeli name, who had been working for El Al in London, literally snuck on board a plane to get back to his reserve unit fighting in the south. He's one of the characters highlighted in the book Who by Fire by Matti Friedman, which tells of the fascinating story of singer and songwriter Leonard Cohen, who also found his way to Israel. Cohen at the time was living the sweet life on a Greek island with his wife and young child. When war broke out, something stirred deep inside, and he just knew he needed to go to Israel. Upon arrival, as fate would have it, he quickly found fellow musicians who were headed south to the Sinai to sing for the soldiers. Despite his strong desire at the time to give up his musical career, Cohen joined them. Finding himself literally on the front lines and at times hiding in bunkers while bombs were falling, he borrowed a guitar and began to sing. Inspired by the sacrifices he witnessed by his fellow Jewish brothers and sisters, facing on death and fighting heroically, he not only found passion again for performing, but also began writing again and started composing one of his most famous songs, Lover, 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 inspired by the war. And within a year of his return to Greece, he wrote his well-known hymn, Who by Fire, his own version of the Unatana Tokef, in response to the experiences on the front, witnessing so much injury and death. And who by fire, and who by water, who in the sunshine, who in the nighttime, who by high ordeal, who by common trial. At one of his first spontaneous concerts on the front, he offered to his audience the following: "You're all together, and you're all here for one another. It's so rare and touching to see it. It is amazing to be here with you and see how you're together without asking questions." Shlomi, in reflecting on this moment years later, remarked that a lot of people say they sang in the war, but actually was just at Air Force bases, and the next day they were back sitting safely at Café Cassit. Not Leonard Cohen. He was really there, at the front, in the face of combat and death. He ate combat rations with us. I opened up a can for him. He was a human being. Whether Shlomi or Jonathan or Leonard or even the Georgian Jews, there was this sense of togetherness and a willingness to sacrifice in some way, to risk one's life for a cause greater than self. A cause, the security of the state, that connected all Jews together during those fateful days in October. So why do I share their stories with you amongst the many that I could have recalled? First, because they epitomize courage in the face of danger. Second, because they are stories of people who did not have to be there, risking their lives. yet choosing to place their fate in some way with the Jewish people and with Israel. They were in their own unique ways Zionists who loved Israel and needed to be there to support this crazy dream of reclaiming our land, our sovereignty, and power after 2,000 years of exile. So I wonder what I would have done had I not been all of 10 years old at the time. What choice would I have made? I hope it would have been to go and help in some way. Many Americans at the time did just that. Many supported financially. Many stood in the streets in protest and support of Israel. Do you remember what you did? What choices you made in a moment of severe crisis for Israel? Some were so inspired by the precariousness of Israel's safety that they vowed, if not then at some point, they would do something to make a difference. Years ago, I remember reading an article written by my teacher, Rabbi Daniel Gordis, on his decision to make Aliyah, fully aware of the challenges personally to him and to the fate of his children having to one day join the army. When asked why, he said, "As a Zionist and lover of Israel, how could I not become part of the most exciting moment in Jewish history in over 2,000 years? I could not live with myself sitting on the sidelines, watching history unfold and not doing my share to ensure Israel's future." Having become one of the most important spokespeople for Israel today, he is constantly challenging his audiences to love Israel despite her imperfections, to understand the complications of Israel and its environs in the Mideast, and to fully participate as best we can in this historic time of reclaiming our land. Which is why he is one that I look to always to gain a deeper sense of understanding of what is happening in Israel and better learn what I, living 6,000 miles away, can do to support her, especially right now. Right now, when Israel, 50 years after the Yom Kippur, is once again at war. This time not with an external enemy, not with the armies of Egypt and Syria bearing down on her, but enemies from within. Enemies who, according to Gordis and others, particularly Yossi Klein Halevi of the Shalom Hartman Institute, who stand on the right of center around political and religious issues, argue that are even more pernicious and dangerous than those external enemies. Comparisons to the destruction of the Second Temple, the last moment of sovereignty before 1948, have been rampant amongst leading Israeli commentators during these most challenging of times. It was sad irony, they said, when the vote to pass the first leg of judicial reform that has broken and paralyzed Israel was voted upon just days before Tisha B'Av, when the Jewish world remembered the end of Jewish sovereignty in 70 CE. In fact, protesters held signs all over Israel with the words Shisha B'Av, meaning the 6th of Av, the day of the vote, making a clear comparison to Israel's fall. To our sages, it wasn't Rome that caused our destruction. It was ourselves. Sinat Chinam, senseless hatred, civil war, extremists in Jerusalem pushing through ideas that would eventually lead to Israel's demise. Listen to Gordis and Klein Halevi as they describe what is happening in their beloved country. Here is Gordis. Israel has become a country of broken hearts, a nation of people paralyzed with disbelief. Reservists, a crucial component of the fighting readiness of the Israel Defense Forces, have dropped out of voluntary service by the thousands. They served in Air Force squadrons, cyber warfare units, the Medical Corps, special operation formations akin to Navy SEALs. There is hardly an elite unit that has not been hit. Netanyahu brought the ultra-Orthodox parties into his government, as he has always done in the past. The Haredim are convenient coalition partners. They have no interest in foreign policy or domestic issues. Even holding on to settlements is hardly a major concern for them. They consistently make but two demands of whatever government they join, whether left, center, or right. They want government funding for their school systems, and they want a continuation of the policy initiated by David Ben-Gurion, exempting young Haredi men from military service. Haredi schools teach little math or English, leaving their graduates utterly unprepared to enter the workforce, and exempting young Haredi men from military service so they can continue to study in yeshivot further limits their exposure to secular society. In fact, next in the vote by the Haredim in government right now is to equate study in yeshiva with military service, both existentially saving the state of Israel. Klein Halevi offers the following. The new governing coalition of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is a mortal danger to our internal cohesion and democratic legitimacy, a historic disgrace. Each day seems to bring some new, previously unimaginable violation of a moral and national red line. He continues, the Netanyahu government is the most politically extreme, the most morally corrupt, and the most contemptuous of good governance in Israel's history. We have known governments with extremist elements, governments rife with corruption or incompetence, but not all at once and not to this extent. This government that speaks in the name of Torah desecrates the name of Judaism. This government that speaks in the name of the Jewish people risks tearing apart the relationship between Israel and the Jewish diaspora. This government that speaks in the name of the Israel ethos is the greatest threat to that ethos that binds Israel's together. This government that speaks in the name of Israel's security is a gift to those seeking to isolate the Jewish state and portray it as criminal. Have you seen what Nasrallah has said in Lebanon about this country, about the Netanyahu government, how they cheer and clap at Israel's downfall? And this, my friends, comes from Yossi Klein Halevi. On the right, a lover of Israel, one who made Aliyah years ago, who travels constantly to this country to remind us to love Israel, to support Israel. This from Klein Halevi and from Gordis. These two men love Israel deeply, and they care about its present and its future. And they want us to love Israel as well. They want us living thousands of miles away to not remain silent, while this government is doing everything it can to destroy the liberal democracy that Israel has cherished for 75 years. Gordis, Klein Halevi, and others ask but one thing of us, as they and the vast majority of Israelis every week continue to fight for their country, for our country. Why? Because today the fight is not about settlements, borders, the economy, or the peace process. Today, the fight is about the very identity and makeup of Israel. Today, the fight is about whether or not there will be an Israel for diaspora Jews to support and visit. In their words, today is the most extraordinary moment in the history of Israel. It is about what does it mean to create and hold on to a liberal democratic state for all citizens, Jews and Arabs and Christians, secular and religious, wealthy and poor, men, women, straight or gay. And if, as they believe, Israel is the center point of Jewish life, then that confers rights and privileges for all Jews everywhere, including the rights of diaspora Jews to speak forcefully for what goes on in Israel. If 37 weeks later, hundreds of thousands of Israelis can join in protest every week, left, center, right, labor, Likud, and everyone in between, then so too must we, they argue. Klein Halevi suggests that it's easy to love Israel when Israel gives us nachas, when Israel is a startup nation, saving lives in Africa or other places around the globe. But true love, he says, is being able to stand up and speak when Israel does things that are disgraceful. Can we, he offers, learn to speak two simultaneous languages of Israel? First, the defense of Israel, particularly against those who challenge her legitimacy, like the BDSers and others who want to criminalize Israel. And second, can we at the same time act with moral responsibility when the government of Israel enacts policies that are morally indefensible? Can we stop without strengthening can we say stop without strengthening the BDS group but actually strengthen those who are defenders of Israel? The greatest threat to the Jewish people, according to Klein Halevi, is the quality of the relationship between American Jews and Israeli Jews, and the rise of anti-democratic voices in Israel, and the rise of anti-Zionist voices in America. And they are tearing at the very foundation of the American-Israeli relationship. Therefore, he begs, challenges, urges us to outgrow the dichotomy that we have created of either black or white defense of Israel or black or white criticism of Israel. Can we find the balance between moral credibility and unequivocal defense? True love is when someone does something disgraceful and we love harder and work to heal, not pull away and deny. We must love and support even when we hold that what is happening is abhorrent. So I wonder then, if this is a moment like that moment 50 years ago when rabbis and congregations around the world woke to the horrific news of the Yom Kippur War and challenged their communities. Is this such a moment? Should we be asking ourselves at this time what we can and what we must do to defend Israel? We are Kol Yisrael Aravim Ze Bazeh, responsible one for another. For some, that may mean joining in the protests run by expat Israelis here in LA every Sunday in front of the consulate. For others, it might be traveling to Israel to witness firsthand what is going on. For all of us, it is reading everything we can to deepen our understanding of the crisis, as well as to continue our financial commitment to those organizations fighting this war. Standing idly by is not an option. My friends, it is time to act. What will you do? What can you do? I conclude with an image that Rabbi Gordis invoked in one of his weekly columns, Israel from the Inside, when he called our attention to the primary symbol of the protest movement. 37 weeks and continuing to grow stronger, he writes, people from labor and Likud, left, right, center, religious, secular, are carrying and waving the Israeli flag, claiming their love of their country and their desire to protect it from those who wish to deliver its fatal blow. I ask you, what does this Israeli flag mean to you? When you see it waving, when you watch the protesters holding it up high, when you look at it here on our bima, does it call to you? Does it motivate you to love more deeply, to understand more fully, to participate as best you can in saving Israel in your own way? Maybe like Jonathan Davis, maybe like Leonard Cohen, maybe like you. Now is the time to step forward and support Israel with all our heart, with all our might, and with all our soul. Let us rise at this time and join our voices together in hope, singing for a better moment for Israel, for us, and for the Jewish people as we sing Hatikva.
Kol od balevav penima, nefesh Yehudi homia, uvate mizrach kadima, ayin letzion Sophia, od lo avda tikvatenu, hatikva bat shnot alpayim, להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון ירושלים. להיות עם חופשי בארצנו, ארץ ציון וירושלים.
As they say in the protests, Am Yisrael Chai.